Yemen is under siege. 6 months of bombing, airstrikes, day in, day out. The bombing campaign is led by Saudi Arabia and backed by the West. On the ground, civil war has split the country. Al-Qaeda and Islamic State are on the rise. A blockade by land and sea is causing a huge and urgent crisis.
We have more than 1 million people displaced across the country. I think overall it's fair to say Yemen is one of the world's worst crises.
Millions are hungry, hundreds of thousands have fled their homes.
Well, I'm just surrounded here by people who, one after the other, are telling me about how their relatives were killed in Saudi airstrikes.
Is the West complicit in a humanitarian catastrophe in which Islamist militants are the biggest winners? On the main shopping street in the capital, Sana'a, a missile has gone straight through the roof of a residential block. 3 people were killed here, including a mother and daughter. No neighborhood is safe.
What happened? Nothing happened. Just people that are sleeping in peace, they get pumping.
I hear screaming, too much screaming. You can see here, around here, all the building is full of families. Yeah. There is not empty, it's full of families.
Last year, a group of Yemeni rebels known as the Houthis seized large parts of the country, including the capital. Civil war followed. The aim of the Saudi-led coalition is to restore the internationally recognised president to power.
Well, this happened just a couple of hours ago, and now everyone seems to be moving off elsewhere. There's talk of another strike in another part of town. We can hear it going on as we speak. This city is under constant bombardment now.
We're travelling out of Sana'a towards the Saudi border. The Houthis have their power base in the mountains of the north. Over the years, they've fought numerous wars against the Yemeni state. But this is part of a bigger game. The Houthis are Shia and supported by Iran. Saudi Arabia, Iran's Sunni rival, doesn't want an Iranian proxy on its southern border. Here, the airstrikes have been even more intense, and we've heard reports of direct attacks on civilians. Ahmed Al-Baina, 13 years old, worked at a water bottling plant. One evening at the end of August, he had dinner as usual with his parents and his brother Mohammed. Then the 2 brothers set off for the night shift. We meet the manager.
Can you tell me what happened?
The plant was hit by an airstrike, he tells me. A single missile landed right in the middle of the factory. It was 3:40 in the morning, just minutes before the end of the shift.
Right. Oh my God, you can see it. You can see it's still smoking here. Yeah.
The workers came out like pieces of coal, they say. The only survivors were the men loading the trucks outside.
ونزلنا ندور بعضهم بالشياول وحصلنا منهم بعضهم قطع وبعض نص منه.
يعني خلاص روح كله ما عاد فيه ولا شيء. لا عوادم ولا مصنع. كامل.
يعني ما ذنب العمال.
يعني العمال حصلناهم يعني في المكاين. خلاص لاصق في المكاين ما في.
And these ones are injured in hospital.
The owner showed us a list of the workers that night. More than half were killed, 13 in total, including the brothers Ahmed and Mohammed. The Saudis say this was a weapons factory and a training camp for African mercenaries. We saw absolutely no evidence of that. One of the workers dusts off a plastic bottle. Is this a missile, he asks?
Oh, did you hear that? Did you hear that? That was an airstrike. Quite distant, but we could definitely hear the thud coming from over that way. All of this is happening not only with the full support of the international community and the stamp of approval of the United Nations Security Council, but also with the enthusiastic support of Britain and of the United States, who not only are continuing to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia even as they bomb, but also have liaison officers stationed inside the Saudi-led coalition high command.
The bottling plant was the only employer in the village. A dozen families lost husbands, sons and breadwinners that morning. Ahmed and Mohammed among them. A community has been devastated, and this is not the only example. The Saudis denied it was a coalition missile that struck Sanaa's old city, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Mohammed, a neighbour, says she and her country feel abandoned by the outside world.
2 صواريخ وفي ماتوا 5 يعني المساكن الناس يعني يستهدفوا بيوت يعني ما يصحش في هذا مش من النظام الحرب ومش النظام يعني فانتي حاولي.
People here have learnt to fear the sound of aeroplanes in the skies.
نرقد الليل ونخاف ونقوم الصبح ونخاف يعني هذا ما قد في أي دولة لا أجنبية ولا عربية.
Whatever it was that destroyed these historic buildings, we do know what military hardware the Saudi Air Force is using over Yemen. Mainly American-made F-15s and British-made Tornadoes and Typhoons, dropping bombs supplied by the US and the UK.
It's difficult to argue that a weapon being sold to Saudi Arabia would not in some way be used in Yemen, or if it's not used in Yemen, it enables the country to use other weapons in Yemen. There is evidence of personnel support again in terms of supporting the Air Force and the Army in its efforts here.
Everywhere you go in Yemen, you see these extraordinary queues. Cars lining up outside petrol stations waiting to buy fuel that isn't there. Perhaps as devastating as the bombing is the blockade, imposed by the Saudi-led coalition to try to stop Iranian weapons from getting to the Houthis, but it's stopping everything else from getting in as well.
The blockade is really causing the country to really be suffocated. Basic goods are not coming in anymore at the rate they need to, and this is a country where about 80 to 90% of goods are imported.
Chronic shortages, not just of fuel but of food and medicines too, have reached crisis proportions. On a ward in a hospital in Sana'a, we meet Reem Abbas and her daughter Rania.
هالحمان الجس ندور البره ساعة 3 ساعات وأحيانا جست يوم كامل ولا بره ما توجد شيء ما بيش حتى بره كيف نفعل يعني إذا كان الطفل مثلا أول الأكسجين يعني إذا ما فيش أكسجين هذيك الساعة الطفل يموت على طول.
She's 4 years old and acutely malnourished due to complications from meningitis.
من سبب لو بعد الوضع هذا يعني عدم كل حاجة حتى الكهرب في المستشفى يعني إذا سبحان الله الماطور وقع في حاجة ولا حاجة وفي بالعناية وفي كذا يموتوا يروحوا فيها سبحان الله.
2 days after we filmed that interview, the hospital closed. Too many airstrikes, too few resources. The scale of the crisis is huge. On top of the blockade and the airstrikes, there's been months of fierce fighting between the two sides. 1.5 million people have fled their homes, seeking shelter in makeshift camps. The United Nations estimates that half the population of Yemen doesn't know where the next meal will come from. Khadija Ahmad is forced to pick leaves from thorn bushes to feed her 4 children.
You grind it up with water.
It's better than starving to death, she says. The family fled here because of airstrikes further north. But nowhere is safe. In July, a missile landed near their tent.
ومزيح حقه ومباروت وقع شاطه وكان مرتكي عليه باب وثانية ضربا حصلت وانا صالوا من هنا من ظهري.
Khadija was 4 months pregnant at the time. She miscarried, lost the baby, but she says she fears hunger more than bombs.
كل الجوع أسوأ من ضربة الطائرة. ما تدرين ابنك يموت مول ولا انت؟ من انا احسب لابني اللي ورايا ما بيش نفسي بابني اللي ورايا اقول كيف يكون حين انا الطائرة تعقرني وهو كيف يقع منه بعدي. عندنا تكملنا بالمرة كلنا سوا ولا يبقى منه.
This is a war in which even refugee camps are no refuge. There's a game the children play here. It's called 1, 2, 3 Airstrike. It's accompanied by squeals of nervous laughter, but it's deadly serious. Deliberately targeting civilians in refugee camps or elsewhere is a crime. Many of these people were already living in camps displaced by earlier wars. Now they're being hit again in places like Harad and Sada, towns near the Saudi border which have been heavily bombed.
But I'm just surrounded here by people coming up one after the other, telling me that their family, their relatives, their children were killed in Saudi airstrikes. There seems to be no end to the witnesses here.
One of the women says a relative wants to speak to us. In an unfinished concrete shell of a house, we find Omar, a sweet seller from a nearby town. He was sitting on his front porch one afternoon when the missile struck.
لأني ما أنام في الليل أتألم كثير جدا آلام لأنه هذا المحل كله هذا أكبر فك ليس مفكوك ما أستطيع أكل عليه كثير.
Omar survived. His son and his pregnant wife were killed.
لأنهم لا يتحرون مناطق الحوثيين يضربون ضرب عشوائي. أنا استطعت أن أحل المشكلة من دون أي طائرات أو كان أستطيع بس مؤتمر 4 ساعات المؤتمر وضرب اليمن في خلال هذه الفترة.
Not all the destruction you see is caused by airstrikes. Houthi soldiers, some no more than teenagers, are accused of firing heavy weapons in built-up areas. But also, big guns in residential neighbourhoods turns civilians into targets from the air. This building looks like it was hit by a missile. Next door, a girls' school has also been damaged.
أول شيء كان من الصباح الطائرة والقصف وبعدين الليل وبعدين بعد دقائق معدودة رموا الصاروخ على طول لهذا البيت.
We meet Malak. She's 15 years old. She shows us into her classroom. Her ambition is to study medicine and become a doctor.
هو في إشاعات إنهم بيقولوا ناس كثير بيقولوا إنه استهدفوا مستهدفين المدرسة علشان فيها أسلحة وفي مدارس كثير بس ما فيش ولا في أي مدرسة.
We don't know exactly how this school was hit. But for now, Malak's education is on hold. Since the conflict started in March, more than 2,000 civilians have been killed by both sides. The United Nations accuses both sides of violating the rules of war. But it is the Saudis and their coalition partners who have overwhelming force in the skies.
Schools and hospitals and markets and enterprises and factories should not be stricken, should not be shelled. Even in warfare there are certain rules to abide with, and they are being violated in this conflict.
Despite 6 months of airstrikes and vicious ground fighting, no one seems to be winning in Yemen. No one, perhaps, apart from Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The Saudi-led coalition has had some success in driving back Houthi forces, especially in the south. But Islamist militants are filling the vacuum.
what now we see is a serious breakdown of law and order. You know that the common enemy has been ousted. Now they start fighting against each other. That is how, and Al-Qaeda is one of the important actors here.
One evening in early September, shopkeepers, electricians and ice sellers gathered in the mosque in this working-class neighbourhood of Sana'a. Then came the explosions.
يعني قمت بعد الانفجار اشوف ان الجثث يعني حولي والذي كان حتى المسعفي والذي كان اسعفنا قد واحد منهم يعني اقول اشلاء مقطعه في جنب السياره.
The first blast was a suicide bomb inside the mosque itself. The second was hidden in a car outside. It was timed to detonate just as people came to help. The following morning, with blood stains still fresh on the street, children gather round a plastic bag containing the remains of what was once someone's head. The bombing was claimed by the group that calls itself Islamic State in Yemen, an attack by Sunni extremists on a Shia Houthi mosque. The survivors wanted us to see inside the mosque.
Easy.
Yeah, you can still smell it.
And see the clothes and the blood and
Bits of charred clothing and other personal belongings lie scattered amid the debris and the prayer books. Hashim Sharif was just meters away when the bombers struck. He was lucky to escape with his life.
أنا الحمد لله كنت أنا في هذه المنطقة في هذا المكان أنا موجود كنت أنا في هذه البقعة تماما عند ناس عندما اقتلبوا قلت يمكن معلش على أساس الركام لا ينطل ولا يعقب صاروخ ثاني.
The bomber had sat near the front of the congregation, his vest packed with ball bearings.
This charred bit of carpet seems to be the epicenter of the blast. This must have been where the suicide bomber was sitting, because you can see all of the shrapnel marks flowing outwards along the carpet, up the pillars, up the walls, all the way up to the ceiling.
At least 20 people were killed, with nerves already frayed by constant airstrikes. Sana'a is a city on edge.
Everyone's pointing up because there's an aeroplane in the sky.
Explosions are a fact of everyday life now, whether from missiles or from suicide bombs. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP, have their heartland in the south. Amid chaotic ground fighting there, we've heard reports of AQAP picking up weapons and money dropped for the anti-Houthi alliance. Sources in Aden told us some of the more extreme members are thought to have split off to form Islamic State in Yemen. Both groups thrive in a state of lawlessness.
We are very concerned because we see already that Al-Qaeda, AQAP, in the Arabian Peninsula was always a force in the south. And we've seen now again, particularly in southern Yemen.
For years, Western policy here has been to take the fight to AQAP inside its Yemeni fortress. The United States has operated an extensive drone program targeting its senior leadership. Yemen's military has received support and weapons to contain the group. But this new conflict has shifted the focus away from AQAP, which is Al-Qaeda's most dangerous franchise.
In this context, Britain and America's support for the Saudi-led campaign here seems contradictory, even perverse. AQAP's avowed aim is to carry out attacks on the West, and it seems fair to assume that those members who've moved on to Islamic State will have similar priorities. And the war here seems to be advancing their cause.
In an increasingly complex Middle East, the old boundaries are becoming blurred. Allegiances are shifting, dynamics changing faster than Western policy can adapt. Meanwhile, on the ground, resentment is growing. A week after the airstrike on the bottling plant, we went to meet the parents of Ahmed and his brother Mohammed.
Assalamu alaikum, Gabriel. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Ibrahim and Khadija Al-Baina described hearing the blast from their home, how they searched through the rubble for the bodies of their sons, how they gathered their severed limbs together in a plastic bag. Mohammed was the family breadwinner. Ahmed, a typical 13-year-old, always on his bike.
ظلموني من ولادي والله ظلموني من أولادنا سنين ماتوا عليه
بعدين راح عليه اثنين محمد وأحمد سواء ساعة واحدة في يوم واحد في ساعة واحدة.
Whoever did this to us, the father says, may God repay them. With their family shattered and their income gone, theirs is an uncertain future. In recent days, the bombing has intensified. In Sana'a, there's talk of an impending ground invasion. This war is part of the wider struggle for power between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Not everyone here supports the Houthis, but with every airstrike and every civilian death, resistance to the Saudis and their allies is growing.